And we're privileged today to have the Honorable Governor Mark Sanford, the Governor of South Carolina, as our guest. And Governor, thanks for being here. And just
My
want
pleasure.
to talk about some of the issues that we're facing as a business community in South Carolina and kind of give your perspective on it. So I know lots going on upstairs right now with the budget debate, and lots been being talked about nationally. Can you talk a little bit why you think the stimulus money is bad for business, or how it affects business in South Carolina and what it's going to do to our future?
I think it's bad on a range of different fronts, which is why I used every tool in my toolkit as a sitting governor to try and stop, jam, impede, or slow passage of the stimulus bill in Washington. I think it will bring with it destruction to the value of the American currency. I think it'll bring with it inflation, which is the real robber of the middle class. You know, inflation robs from everybody who has saved throughout their lives. I think that those are the end results, the consequences of going out and printing money that you don't have. I don't think a problem that was created by too much debt will ever be solved with yet more debt. So I was against it. But we lost, and it passed. And so then the question is, at the practical level, what do you do from the standpoint of governance as a chief executive of the state in what makes common sense? And so we looked at the whole, and we said, you know, in our instance, if we take this complete windfall, a number of different bad things happen. One, we end up about $744 million in the hole 24 months from now. And so everybody's talking about teachers and law enforcement personnel or folks who work in prisons, but the bottom line is every one of those folks hope to keep their job more than 24 months. I had an interesting conversation with an editorial writer the other day who had blistered me, and I said, okay, I got it that you don't like my program, but tell me yours. And their response was, well, we hope that the economy will be better in 24 months so we avoid being, you know, in a budgetary hole. And I said, well, I hope so too. But Gordon Sullivan, who was former Chief of Staff of the United States Army, wrote a book called, you know, Hope is Not a Method. And the one thing that I was taught as a business person from day one is you protect that downside, you watch that downside, and the upside will take care of itself. And so I think that what we're really trying to do, and I said, you know, what if that doesn't happen? And this editorial writer responded and said, well, then we're toast. Yeah. I said, well, what kind of approach is that? I mean, as a fiduciary, as a trustee, you can't contemplate a path wherein one of the outcomes is, quote, your toast. So I think that one of the things that it would bring is somewhere between toast and a $740 million hole is where we'd end up. I'd say secondly, what is really being debated here is reform. The reforms that in many cases have been long contemplated, long talked about, but not acted upon. And it's only in these tough budget times that you really have a chance of making the kinds of changes that are possible in tough economic times. So it takes the wind out of the sail of some reforms that are long overdue in South Carolina. And I'd say the third thing that it does is it prevents us from shoring up our balance sheet. You know, if there's ever a time that people appreciate in business this notion of shoring up a balance sheet, of having a strong balance sheet, it's now. Right. And yet South Carolina ranks fourth in the nation in what we allocate to debt repayment rather than to paying for teachers or health care or other government services. So that's a full 11% of what we spend every year goes to interest for bondholders that may live in New York or Zurich. Right. And, you know, I think that if you have the chance, as we do now, this is sort of the lottery of all lotteries for state governments, to take some of that money and to prudently put it aside as a prudent family would in paying down the mortgage or the credit card balance, it makes sense. And so we take some of that money, pay down the mortgage, and that would allow us as a state to be better equipped to handle what I think will be a long-running financial storm.
Let's talk about governmental restructuring. I know that's been at the top of your list, efficiencies in government and all. What agencies more than any need to be restructured, Governor, if we're going to be able to deliver the type of services that you believe best exemplifies a well-run government?
I'll give you two examples. Again, there are a fairly countless list of examples, but two would be Employment Security Commission. You know, there was a House and Senate companion bills teed up, ready to go, And yet, I suspect you've heard the same. It's being held up. I'll leave aside which body, although it starts with a H and ends with a E. And basically, what you hear through the rumor mill is, unless you agree to accept that stimulus money, we ain't moving on the Employment Security Commission bill. I think that's crazy, because what you're talking about is a huge tax that's going to be handed to the business community of South Carolina if we don't reform the Employment Security Commission. I mean, literally, it seems like almost on a weekly basis, we get yet another request for $50 million, $20 million, $30 million, and those are not grants. Those are loans from the federal government that are going to be repaid, and they're going to be repaid on the backs of people who are working in South Carolina and the employers that employ those folks working in South Carolina. So I'd say one of the areas, and this is a group that bled down a $600 million trust fund without making a peep. And normally as a fiduciary, you'd say, hey, we got a real problem here. You'd be standing on the top of the tallest building in Columbia saying, we got a real problem, but not a noise was made. And so I think you got really substantial changes that do need to take place over the Employment Security Commission. And Budget Control Board. It is the central nervous system of the old way of doing things. We're the only state in the United States of America that has a Budget Control Board. It handles the, in essence, administrative executive branch functions that are handled by the other 49 governors in the United States of America. It has historically been a housing ground for political hacks of both stripes. When Republicans in power, Republicans get stored over there. When Democrats are in power, Democrats get stored over there, or legislative folks from either party. It is, I think, an incredible inefficient way of doing things. And it has a lot to do with why we're 130% the U.S. average in the cost of doing business in South Carolina, which again is a silent tax on the business community of our state.